welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Zeynep Gökçe. In a bid to curb irregular migration and confront rising instability in the Mediterranean, Türkiye, Italy and Libya held a high-level summit in Istanbul. The talks brought together President Erdogan, Prime Minister Meloni and Prime Minister Dbeibah, signalling a deeper trilateral approach to one of Europe's most pressing challenges. While Libya remains politically divided, Ankara's inclusion of the Tripoli-based government underscores its growing role in shaping regional diplomacy. Safia Amri has more.
For Türkiye, the Eastern Mediterranean symbolizes more than just geographical boundaries. It represents sovereignty. Ankara has long challenged Greece's maritime claims, especially after a 2020 agreement between Athens and Cairo, which Türkiye says ignores its continental shelf and maritime rights. The deal heightened tensions, prompting both nations to enhance their naval presence in the contested waters. Last week, Türkiye hosted a trilateral summit in Istanbul with Italy and Libya, aimed at improving regional stability and addressing migration issues. Libya's Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibah was central to those talks, just weeks after a migrant boat sank off Libya's coast, killing dozens. The central Mediterranean is the world's deadliest migration route. The International Organization for Migration says over the past 5 years, nearly 10,000 migrants have died or gone missing. In 2019, Türkiye signed a maritime delimitation deal with Libya's UN-recognized government, which altered exclusive economic zones. It bypassed the Greek islands and was condemned by Athens and the EU. But Ankara has remained steadfast. In June, it signed a new agreement with Libya for joint geological surveys, deepening energy ties. Relations between Turkey and Italy have strengthened, especially over shared migration concerns. Those ties deepened after Baykar, Turkey's leading drone manufacturer, inked a major deal with Italy's aerospace company, Leonardo. The partnership not only reflects defense alignment, but also shared Mediterranean priorities. But even as diplomacy advances, Libya remains unstable. Before his overthrow in 2011, Muammar Gaddafi acted as a gatekeeper for Europe, using Libya's coastline to control the flow of migrants across the Mediterranean. Since his fall, migrant departures have surged unchecked. The country is politically divided between rival administrations in the east and west, each backed by foreign powers. Elections have stalled and armed groups continue to hinder progress. For Türkiye, Italy and others, Libya's fragmentation remains one of the greatest barriers to lasting regional stability. From contested waters, genocide, to fractured states, the Mediterranean is no longer just a sea. It's a mirror reflecting the divisions of a world in crisis. Safia Amri, Straight Talk.
For more, joining me now from Istanbul is Anas El Gomati. He's the founder and director of the Sadeq Institute. We also have Ferhat Polat, a researcher at the TRT World Research Center, and Federico Donelli, an assistant professor at the University of Trieste. Now, gentlemen, we will, of course, unpack the details of this unexpected trilateral meeting. But before that, Anas, tell us, why was it important for Libya to join this meeting, and do you expect this to become a permanent format?
Well, I certainly think the early signs is that this is more than just a diplomatic handshake. It could be the birth of a Mediterranean arena for pragmatism. Libya is used to being at the center of crisis talks, of UN peace talks, of attempts to try and bring a final resolution to what has been 14, almost 15 years of instability and repeated civil wars. So when you have a meeting like this, where the Tripoli government, the government of national unity, is at the center, I think it kind of gives an indication of things to come. I mean, you can look at the concrete numbers. The migration numbers for Italy are particularly more optimistic. It's 80% less this year than it was last year. You now have the Tripoli-based government, the GNU, and Ankara beginning to work on seismic surveys in the Eastern Med. So there are some indications of pragmatic steps forward, and I think it could become a format for the future, but it requires a lot of work. It wouldn't be the first attempt. The EU has many attempts in the southern neighbourhood to try and coordinate with partners outside of the European Union. This is more intriguing because it brings together Turkey, which is perhaps the key player today in Libya. It brings together the key player in the European Union, Italy, that shares kilometers of distance only from Libya's borders or its naval borders. And I think it brings together the GNU at a time of crisis, where they want to be seen as not just being a problem, but being an answer to many of the problems in the European Union. So I think it's early signs and early positive signs, but one has to be realistic.
Yes, and top intelligence and security officials also joined these meetings. So Ferhat, how should this be interpreted?
I think this is significant development, as Enes mentioned earlier, and it's not only symbolic. I think it's a start of something like a trilateral summit. It was more than one-off, and I think it's a calculated geopolitical statement. And given that there was a serious tensions in Eastern Mediterranean Sea recently happened between Libya and Greece, and I think the timing also is important. And Italy, Turkey, and also Libya are aligning on energy, migration, and I think this is it's a first step, but it's a significant step. But it remains to be seen how they will create a joint mechanism to implement what they have declared so far, joint declaration. It will be significant for also Libya, and because Libya has been suffering from ongoing political instability, Turkey is one of the leading actors in the country. And if they cooperate and on the Libyan case as well as in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, that will be game changer in the coming months and days. But there is a huge potential.
Yes, and there's a growing partnership between Ankara and Rome. We've seen in the past months and now. So Federico, how have Turkey and Italy aligned their approaches when it comes to Libya's political future? And also, to what extent are they cooperating? Because they're also trying to gain more influence. Where does the competition start between them?
Of course, as my colleague already said, the Italy and Turkey have established a strong cooperation, not only in Libya, but on a multiple issue. Of course, Libya is one of the top priority, especially for Italian government due to the migration crisis. And Italy recognizes how important it is to cooperate with Turkey in Libya as in other countries. So I think that what we have seen during the last couple of years or so, since the beginning of the new government, of the Prime Minister Meloni government, is an increasing cooperation among the two countries, not only in the Mediterranean, but also in other African regions. So I think that this meeting, the last meeting, is also related to the Mattei Plan. Mattei Plan is this Italian plan for Africa, and of course with the increasing engagement of Turkey in the African continent.
Yes, and Anas, I want to talk a bit about the current circumstances in Libya. How would you compare it to a year ago? Has it become worse or has it become better in some ways? Also, do you think Libya is being overlooked due to other regional crises?
Absolutely so, and I think in many ways one can't ignore the plight of those that are facing a genocide in Gaza. It's rightly so that takes priorities, but in the world of geopolitics, life continues to happen, and matters are no less important. For example, in the divisions that have happened in Libya, for Turkey's position a year ago, let's just go back even 6 years ago, at the beginning of the last civil war in 2019. Turkey came in and played perhaps the most revolutionary role of all of the geopolitical actors and changed the tide for the government of national accord, the former UN-backed government in Tripoli, and was seen to be the major player in Libya, but seemed to be a player that was only backing the Tripoli administration. If you look 6 years on today, Ankara is now speaking to both sides. It has a consulate now that is open, I believe, in Benghazi. It has a massive relationship, a burgeoning relationship, economic relationship with powers in the east. Its maritime MOU is now being debated on the floor of the parliament in the east. It's a massive turnaround for the Turks. But in terms of what is happening in Libya, it's still a divided country. You still have almost two of everything. You have two parliaments, two prime ministers, two rival governments, and two purported armies on the ground. And in addition to that, you have major powers that are still using that, like the UAE and Russia, that are using eastern Libya and central Libya to funnel weapons into Sudan. So Libya's problems are also going into further into the Sahel. I don't think it's any better for Libyans today than it was 5 years ago. There's a lot of calm, but there's always calm before the storm. Today's kind of diplomatic initiatives are a way in which to stop Libya from becoming that proxy battleground that it has been, and allow the major powers to begin some kind of proxy management, managing some of those issues where they're not always in conflict and always in competition, but they cooperate with each other. And that's certainly a better alternative to what it was 6 years ago. But Libya is still in desperate need of being able to solve the main crux of its problem. What does a unified government look like in Libya? What do elections, and when do elections come for the Libyan people, 7.5 million people, to choose their destination and their future? That is something that is still up for grabs.
Yes, and speaking of elections, now, Ferhat, a few months back, you were actually on Straight Talk, and you said that you think that elections could actually make the situation worse in Libya. I don't know if you've changed your mind in the meantime, but what is the way out then? What is the solution, in your opinion? Also, Türkiye seems to be positioning itself as a mediator. How can it contribute to this process?
I mean, yes, I still have the same perspective, and election, it seems to be regarded as a quick fix. I don't think it will solve the existing issues in Libya, because Libya's state institutions are pretty much ineffective and divided among rival groups. And in order to rushing into elections won't solve any existing issues. And before that, I think there are two important things that should happen before even discussing elections. First of all, security is still a huge issue in Libya across the country. How will you, allow people to go and freely vote in a country where everything is divided and the tension is still high? And secondly, there is still no election law and there is no constitution, and Libyans, they don't know what they are going to vote, whether they have a parliamentary system, whether they will have a presidential system. So there is also no national dialogue. There is no consensus on constitution. There is no consensus on election law. Plus, and there are some divisive candidates, whether they will run for the elections. And if the election happens, the next day, the loser sides will accept the result, or they will be excluded from the political scene in Libya. These are the main obstacles. And without having such conducive environment, I don't think election will solve any existing issues, even can trigger a fresh conflict.
Yes, all right. And the migration crisis was also top on the agenda at this summit. And Italy is one of those countries that's most affected by this crisis. So, Federico, do you think Italy is trying to balance the EU migration policy with a more regional approach through forums like this summit?
Of course, I think that Italy is trying to find its own way to address the migration issue. We know that this government, the Meloni government, pose a sort of top priority for migration since the election period. So for them, it's really important. And we can even explain that by saying that before the summit, Meloni also traveled to Tunisia. That is another important transit country for migration. So I believe that behind this summit, there are multiple reasons. Migration is one of them, but is not the only one. I think that it's more important to stress how Italy and Turkey, especially during the last 2 years in this international scenario that is very confused, are trying to converge on multiple issues. So I think it's important to see the wider or the broader picture of this meeting.
Yes, Anas, what are Libya's sensitivities when it comes to the irregular migration issue?
Well, I think for Libyans, I think it's the first thing is that this is a perception management issue. Libya is a transit country for the most part refugees and migrants come through the southern borders of Libya, southwest and southeast, and then aiming to go over the northern border into Europe and into the Mediterranean. So for Libyans, I think the first perception issue is this is not our problem. We shouldn't have to be paying the buck to be dealing with this. The second issue is I think that most of the time when it comes to negotiations, it has been the securitization of Libya's diplomatic file. So it's looked at in terms of the EU as a problem that they want to manage, not a problem that they want to resolve. And so migration is normally used as that chicken and, well, it's not even a chicken and the egg. It's more like a carrot and the stick. If you work with us on migration issues, we will give you some carrots, we'll give you some market access. We may even give you some legitimacy for one of the two rival governments. But in terms of a crisis there in Libya, Libya is a massive territory. It's sizable in terms of its ability to be able to absorb irregular migration. But in terms of its ability to manage that crisis with the European Union, you have divided institutions, you have a divided Coast Guard, you have rival factions that are no longer working with each other in terms of their intelligence building capacity, working on cooperation in that central zone near Sirte, in the central part of Libya, where east divides west. And so if you're not able to coordinate with each other, communicate with each other, and you don't see the problem in the way that the rest of the world sees a problem, you have a major issue. In terms of its sensitivities, I think, cynically saying, I think most of the Libyan parties themselves would rather use this as an opportunity today to re-establish their legitimacy and avoid the conversations that are rightly Ferhat pointed out. There needs to be institutional capacity building, not only for a constitution for Libya, for its democratic roadmap, but also for those institutions that are not functioning because they have been captured by elites. And they don't just not work for Libyans, they don't work for the rest of the international community, which is why it's so vital to have these kind of meetings, because even if Libya doesn't resolve its own internal problems, the rest of the world will suffer. And I think that's why you need to have these kind of meetings with a technical follow-up, with ministerial follow-up, and with the ability to try and help Libyans on the ground in both factions begin to coordinate, because they can't ignore those problems until they get too big.
Yes, and maybe some other countries will join this summit in the future. And actually, Greek media questioned why its government wasn't at the table. Ferhat, do you think Greece should have a seat at the table?
I mean, if there is a genuine interest and to find a solution to existing issues and dispute between Turkey and Greece when it comes to Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and I think Turkey has willing to work with any sides as long as they respect their rights and their claim in Eastern Mediterranean Sea. Libya is one of the case, and even through this maritime agreement, respective exclusive economic zones on both sides have increased. So even I think also it's imperative to note that although so many analysts discuss like this deal was signed in 2019, but Turkey has been seeking this deal since 2010. And before Gaddafi was toppled, Turkey was close to reach this deal. But because of the conflict and Arab Spring that put aside, and then Turkey find a right time and with Libya sides and sign this agreement, even if this agreement included Egypt, also Egypt will increase its exclusive economic zone. So having a deal with Turkey, including Turkey in the cooperation or regional cooperation, will benefit not only for Turkey, for other countries, neighboring countries. So win-win approach is, if it exists, then I think Greece also will gain positively from this kind of summit and cooperation.
So what does this trilateral meeting signal to other players in the region, such as Egypt and Russia? Federico, how do you expect them to read this cooperation?
Well, we know that, for example, Egypt and Italy have very good relationship, and also recently Egypt re-established good relationship with Turkey as well. I don't think that Russia is looking too much in Libya nowadays. I think that got more interest into Algeria or in the Red Sea. So I don't see any problems behind this meeting for the Russian perspective. Southern flank of NATO is becoming more and more strong due to this convergence of strategic interests between Turkey and Italy.
Yes, and Anas, Libya actually suggested that Qatar also joins this summit. Why is that? What are its expectations here?
Well, I think that Qatar, as a Gulf country and as a regional power, has shown that it's more interested in arbitration and mediation and neutralizing a lot of the different conflicts that have been happening, whether it's in the DRC, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Palestine and in Gaza. So I think when you have a power that has that, well, when you have a player that has that much convening power, when it has that kind of track record of neutralizing internal civil wars and conflicts that seem, that seem almost like they're unsolvable, then I think it's a nod by the Tripoli administration and by Turkey and by Italy to try to bring in a player that is a seasoned veteran when it comes to these kind of conflicts, and also trying to give a nod to the fact that Libya, whilst it's happy, at least on the Tripoli government side, it's happy to be seen as a player and not a problem at the table. I think it's still an acknowledgement that there is still a deep problem, a deep division in Libya, and then it needs a player that has a track record in being able to resolve these things. I think it's also a nod that we know that the multilateral bodies that have been working on Libya for many, many years now, whether that's the United Nations and the EU, that many people pay lip service to as being able to have the kind of convening power. I don't think that works anymore, and I think Libya is a space and a theater that has shown that it can't work. And so I think what it's showing is that the big players, the players that are invested, the players that have similar interests are going to try and be the ones that are sitting at the table. And I think Qatar's invitation is just a reflection of that.
Yes, and Ferhat, I want to ask my last question to you. So, as you know, Turkey and Libya made a military cooperation agreement recently. Also, the national oil companies of both sides made some deals. What kind of opportunities are opening up for Turkey in Libya?
Libya is an oil-rich country, has largest reserves in Africa and huge potential. But unfortunately, because of the conflicts, ongoing conflicts, which negatively affected the oil infrastructures in Libya, which Turkey can help to restore some of those and make some progress, which will increase and boost the oil production in Libya. And also joint cooperation in Eastern Mediterranean Sea will benefit because there is a believed to be huge hydrocarbon reserves in Eastern Mediterranean Sea. If both countries work together, which is, I think there are some signs now they are going to take even further actions and implementing these agreements. And Libya, first of all, needs to fix its own problems. And one of them, like Anas mentioned, internal dynamics needs to be in a way that the problem needs to be solved, like security situation, which still country struggles. There is no unified standing professional army, which Turkey has been trying to help, and training those forces and providing training and increasing the defense capacity, which is significant for Libya to move on further step, which is more stabilization and so on. So there are lots of other potentials if the country is stabilized. I think it is important to note that once Libya is stabilized, all the countries can benefit from these countries' resources, and also Libyan themselves. They can, Libya, it's an oil-rich country, but even ordinary Libyans, they struggle to gain basic, needs, which is, given that Libya could be another Gulf country. So it has so much potential, even more because it's coastal line, Eastern Mediterranean Sea. If Turkey and Libya and other countries, including Italy, if they cooperate together, I think there is a huge benefits for all sides.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all the time we had. Thank you all for joining me. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Zeynep Gökçe. If you've got any comments, please share them with us on X @StraightTalkTRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.